Welcome to the Working on Wellbeing podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Cunningham, and I am passionate about the science behind how we can all work on our well-being. That's how I came to lead the World Wellbeing Movement, a non-profit social impact organisation housed within the University of Oxford's Wellbeing Research Centre. In short, our mission is to improve the quality of life of people across the world by connecting well-being experts with those people who can make the biggest impact, so with business leaders and policymakers. And through my work, I get to meet the most incredible people. That's why we've created this podcast, so that you can be a fly on the wall during my conversations with the world's leading wellbeing experts. In today's episode, we'll hear what impact moving to a 4-day week can have on both businesses and employees alike. I'm delighted to welcome today's guests, Charlotte Lockhart and Andrew Barnes, co-founders of 4-Day Week Global, which is also a founding member of the World Wellbeing Movement. And Charlotte, you're also the managing director of 4-Day Week Global. And Andrew, you're also an entrepreneur who has earned the title architect of the 4-Day Week. So I'm going to be going to you in a couple of minutes to find out how you earned that title. But before I do, maybe let's start with the 5-day week. And Charlotte, could you tell me, because my understanding is that the 5-day week itself is about 100 years old. Is that right? Can you tell me a bit about the origin?
Yes. Well, Henry Ford is attributed to establishing the 5-day week. He was busy making cars and realised that people didn't have time to drive them. So if he gave his people a 5-day week, then they would be able to buy the cars that they were manufacturing. And so the weekend grew out of that time. But as a functional part of our society, it really is post-Second World War, was when we started really having a weekend, and our society started to frame itself around that, and countries started enacting legislation for a 40-hour work week.
Okay, now that's really helpful. So Henry Ford would have been, I guess, the architect of the 5-day week,
Yes.
Which brings us to you, Andrew. Tell us, how did you earn the title architect of the 4-day week?
Well, I feel a little bit of a fraud, frankly, because I was trying to answer a totally different question. I was trying to work out, I'd read this research that said people are only productive for 3 hours a day. And I thought, why is that happening in my company? And what would happen if I changed the work paradigm? Say to people, if I gave you an extra day off a week, would you do things differently so that I could get the same level of productivity? So that's what I was trying to do. Forget work-life balance, forget well-being. It was all about, how do I make my company more efficient? So back in 2018, I announced to my team, so we're going to try this. I have no idea how it's going to work. And we ran a 6-week trial. We ran research alongside of it. And what we found, of course, was that not only did productivity go up, but then all the well-being scores went up extraordinarily to levels which researchers said were the highest they'd ever seen. And that's really where it all began, isn't it? It's where we the phone started to ring off the hook. We stopped counting at 14,000 media stories, because suddenly we realised everybody in the world is looking to work less and to be better in their lives.
It's so interesting. So that was in your own financial services company in New Zealand that you ran that experiment. And I guess the success of that made both of you decide, right, let's go bigger. Let's create the 4-day week global movement and pilot this in different companies across the world. Is that sort of how things progressed?
Well, I actually credit Jan Emanuel Deneve from the World Wellbeing Movement, and Oxford University, because one of the things that happened was we had a whole pile of people want to talk to us, and he was one of them. And it was his enthusiasm about the research that we had done that made us realise that it actually was quite significant. So we had all this media, which is lovely. Media are lovely. But it was the depth of excitement from Jan Emanuel.
So Charlotte and I were doing the Peking Paris car rally in 2019, and we're in the middle of Siberia. And the phone rings, and they said, "Where are you?" And we said, "Well, God knows where. Heading for Novosibirsk in the middle of Siberia." Phone down. They rang back and said, "There will be television crews from Moscow flying in to meet you." And we arrived late. We'd blown the clutch. I was covered in oil from head to foot. We did 3 interviews back to back. And then as we left Russia 2 weeks later, they started talking about enacting legislation. Now, I think that was the point where you suddenly sit there and say, actually, this is bigger than what we thought. You only get one chance to change the world. This is our chance to change the world. And from that, 4-Day Week Global was born.
And we set 4-Day Week Global up really just as a place to house these conversations. And then we had a pandemic, which was interesting. And of course, but as everybody knows, the pandemic has completely changed our view on how we will work. But it's also put our mental health at work at the forefront as well. And so we have now morphed into this organisation that does research on the benefits of reducing work time, so not just 4-day week, but reduced work time. We support lots of governments and national and regional governments in terms of running pilot programs with that. And then we obviously support businesses to run pilot programs and get it, as the Irish campaign call it, #better for everyone.
I love that. #better for everyone. Well, I'm going to ask you why, because I think what's wonderful about the approach you've taken is that you have run pilots right across the world, because we all know there are cultural differences. So my understanding is you've run pilots in Ireland, UK, US, South Africa, Portugal, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand. Is that right?
Yes, North America, Canada. Yeah.
Which is incredible, really incredible. And I guess there'll be business leaders listening. And the biggest question they're going to have is, look, if I were to switch my business next week to a 4-day week, what's the single biggest impact that would have on my business?
Right. Well, your company will be better. I mean, I'm going to go right out on a limb here. If you have a healthier, happier, more engaged, more committed, more collegiate workforce, they're going to be less productive, aren't they?
No.
Not. It's not that hard. This is about starting to think about, in the days when Henry Ford did the 5-day week, it was repetitive manufacturing industry. Now, in the 4th industrial revolution, creative age, what we actually need to do is to be thinking about, how do we make this work better? And to make that work better, you have to think about human capital, just as you would use to think about maintaining a machine. How does that human work better? Well, it works better with breaks. It works better if it's committed. It works better if it's been empowered to do things differently. So it's not rocket science. We all know about this. It's just that we've all been conditioned as leaders to think, 1, we know all the answers. We don't. And 2, that working longer equates working harder. And what we're talking about is working smarter.
Can I pick up on that? Because I think it's a really interesting point you make. Of course, we are seeing an increase in burnout, right? There's a lot of recent research from McKinsey Health Institute, also from Deloitte, talking about actually the cost of absenteeism due to burnout and mental health challenges. If I recall correctly, Deloitte quantified that as costing, in the UK alone, costing employers £56 billion per year. So we know there's an issue. And you talked about how the nature of work has changed since the time of Henry Ford. And I read somewhere that we're about 7 times more productive, but that comes at a cost, because we have a much heavier cognitive load. And I guess that's why we need those regular breaks that you're talking about. So I do want to clarify one thing in terms of how the 4-day week works. So this is not about getting paid for 4 days, right? I believe you have a principle called 100, 80, 100. Could you explain that a bit, Charlotte?
Yes. So we are very adamant that it is 100% pay, 80% time with 100% productivity. And the interesting thing about that formula is, as much as we call ourselves 4-day week global, we're really not talking about a 3-day weekend. We're talking about how you reduce work time. And it might not be that you are reducing work time from a 50-hour week or a 60-hour week. A lot of people out there listening will be going, but, we work 50, 60, 70 hours a week. And it's about recognizing that the amount that we are working now isn't actually holding our society together anymore. And burnout is the phrase that we use to describe that. And, I'm a Gen X. We Gen Xers and baby boomers, we invented burnout. But the modern workplace needs to understand that the millennials and the Gen Zs that are coming in, they want a very different workplace. They are our children, and they watched us burn out, and they don't want to have any of that. And they have invented quietly quitting and the Great Resignation. Although it's not that these things didn't exist before, it's just that they've named it. And so as a society, as humans, we always want our children to have better than we did. And in the past, that's always been better food, better housing, better education. But all that's led to in the 21st century is more housing, more food, a low obesity epidemic. And our children, the only thing they want more of is time. And they know that they can be effective in the workplace. They want to be productive because we know this, they want meaningful work. They want what they do at work to matter. So they're not being lazy, they're just recognising that it's unsustainable. Just as that generation have led the climate change movement as well. They've realised the way we live is unsustainable for the environment, but they're now transposing that into the workplace, and we should be very proud of them and encourage them in every single way we can.
I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't agree more. And I think listening to you, particularly the impacts on individuals' well-being is so clear. One of the challenges, of course, that, CFOs will face is, we're in a period of sort of inflation and a little bit of stock market turbulence, and ultimately they need to look at the bottom line. So if a CFO is looking at going, right, can we afford to move to this model where we're paying people the same, but we're asking them to work 4 days instead of 5? How have you seen this impact through your pilots on productivity, on bottom line revenue, those kind of metrics?
Well, this is really the role I play in the organisation. I'm the bar humbug person. But at the end of the day, when we implemented the trial at Perpetual Guardian, if it had gone wrong, it hit my back pocket. I was the principal shareholder. So I'm absolutely focused on what are the outputs from a business perspective of this. Well, the reality is the 180-100 isn't the 180-100. It's the 180-120. Productivity is going up as a consequence of this. One of the great examples was Microsoft Japan did this, and they just cut down meeting times, no more than 5 people in a meeting, no meeting longer than half an hour. I used Microsoft Teams and got a 39.9% improvement in productivity. But it doesn't stop there. What you find is that your sick days halve. Now, that's not just, so that's playing to the Deloitte analysis of how many sick days there are in the UK. So your sick days are halving, but equally, because the sick day is an unplanned day, its impact on the business is far higher than a planned day off. What you're also finding is that you can recruit people. So you're seeing, in some cases, some companies saw a 200% increase in the number of people applying. Now, we're the dullest company in New Zealand, right? We do death. We're a trust company. Nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, you know what? I want to work for a trust company. But we introduced the 4-day week, and that said something about our organisation. So suddenly our talent pool is improving. Again, I'm going out on a limb. You get more talented, more committed people. They're going to be more productive. So the bottom line is this is the most rational, sensible business strategy you can ever do. The only reason a CFO doesn't believe it is because I'm saying you can be more productive by working less.
And I think, as we go into these harder financial times, and whether we're going to have a recession or not is obviously is yet to be seen. But this is the time to be focusing in on your productivity. And so if you come in as an employer and you say to your people, look, I've got these consultants in because we want to do time and motion and blah, blah, blah. We want you all to be more productive. All that your people hear is you want me to do more with less, and redundancies are on the way. But if you say to your people, hey guys, here's a really crazy idea. If we can make the business more productive, you can go home. Then people go, okay, I can get behind that story. I can work out how to do that. Because, of course, Parkinson's law says that work expands to the amount of time that we make available for it. And so then when people apply their minds, no matter what industry they are in, to actually, so one of the biggest pieces of advice is you cannot do this from the top. This is not a C-suite exercise. This is a bottom-up process. And when people apply their minds to how they're going to do their jobs in less time, there are things that they know, but there are also things that they don't know. And I love the story. There's a classic story that came out of Perpetual Guardian where we had two offices that only had two people in them, and they were in reasonably geographically far away place from each other. But what they did was, and this is prior to the pandemic, before we went all digital, they actually connected up digitally so that they could do the 4-day week or reduced hour working. So therefore, their customer base went from having two people at any one time, possibly down to one. When someone's sick or on leave, it's one. And they went to a pool of 4 people. So therefore, they were always able to have one senior and one junior available. So actually the client service went up. So businesses find these ways. Now, management didn't think of that. Nobody thought of it before. We made time the scarce resource. And so I think that's one of the things that we need to be very mindful of.
And I think the other side of this is the question we always get asked. So the CFOs will look at us, or the CEOs will look at us and say, well, how do you measure productivity? So what are they actually saying there? What they're saying is, we don't measure productivity. We're using time as a surrogate for productivity. And it comes up time and time again. And what we're saying is part of this is focusing on output, not time. Because what we're doing is we're saying rethink your company. Once you break the nexus of a 9 to 5 days a week, it's very liberating. You can rethink how you shape your business, when your opening hours are, how you staff it, and you basically recreate the company using the power of your people to rethink how they deliver the service. Because the key determinants are productivity has to be at least the same, and customer service cannot go down.
With this podcast, one of the things that we want for listeners is every episode, listeners will get actionable tips that they can quickly put into action. And you've already both shared 2, which I think are great. One was the thinking more carefully about how, 4 people instead of 2 people can, effectively cover around the clock. Another was your point about shorter meetings. That's a big one for me is, do we really need to invite 10 people to this meeting? And does this meeting really need to be a full hour? Are there other sort of seemingly small, but actually really beneficial, actionable tips that you've encountered during your pilots?
Look, I think the key thing is to understand that how it's going to work for your business needs to be established by your people. So we have 2 pieces of advice. It can't be done from the C-suite, but it's also don't overthink it. So the number of organisations that have, well, actually, it's not many of them, but certainly there's one particular one where they were going to do this and they didn't end up doing it because they needed to solve all of the problems around how they were going to have a successful 4-day week before they even ran the pilot. So the biggest tip is actually design a pilot for yourselves. And we can help with that, and we've got resources on our website as well. But what you need to do is try it. And what the C-suite's commitment is, Look, we think that this is a good idea. We think it's a great way. The number one reason why business leaders do it now is to attract and retain the best staff. You can't compete on price anymore. The staff are asking for these types of things. And so that's the C-suite's job. Is go, look, we're interested in it. But all you're committing to is actually running a pilot. Yeah. You don't have to commit to it being a permanent thing. You can just say, we just want to run a pilot. We just want to see how we can make this work. And then let your people come up with the innovation. And your job from the C-suite is to resource them properly. Now, that might be technology or equipment or anything, but in the main part, it's in resourcing them by empowering them. Yeah. Yeah. And it's giving them the authority and autonomy to do it, but also maybe giving them some additional training.
It certainly shines a spotlight on your leadership team. But one of the other key things, very simple things, you have to walk the talk. How many organizations, say, we'll do flexible working, but there's somebody in the line of management that doesn't agree with it? The only people in our company who are obligated to do the 4-day week was the senior leadership team. They had to walk the talk. They had to not go on emails. They had to not make those phone calls. Now, were they doing a little bit of work on their day off? Very possibly, but they couldn't be seen to be doing that. So we had to establish a cultural norm. Now, in due course, of course, they suddenly found that they were more effective as well. Because when you start having respect for other people's time, I'm not going to waste your time if you don't waste mine, then suddenly you find that they become better leaders. They're better at empowering, motivating their staff. And one of the great things that comes out of this is the staff are happier. And guess what? Happier staff are easier to manage. I mean, I keep coming back to this. It's not rocket science. We all know this. I'm an ex-naval officer. We used to have a saying, a good ship is a happy ship.
Yeah, agreed.
A good company is a happy company.
Agreed.
And I remember a business leader saying to me when prior to starting her pilot, she did her actual technical part of her job on the train home and after work. Because when she was at work, people were constantly coming to her for validation, usually. I mean, they either want to tell you that they've done something good and they want a pat on the back, or they're coming to tell you that there's a problem and they need you to help them sort it out. And what she found was that when people in her department knew what they were supposed to be there for, what was their productive outcome, how they fitted in with the team, and they were given the power to do their jobs themselves. She said, no one comes and talks to me anymore because they're actually just getting on with doing their jobs. And she got her job done during office hours.
So this is really interesting because you're talking about a couple of really key drivers of workplace wellbeing here. First of all, autonomy. Second of all, trust. And of course, the word that you've both used quite a bit is flexibility. And I'd love you to talk a little bit more about how a 4-day week complements work flexibility. So you're not talking about rigid 9 to 5, Monday to Thursday.
No. And look, the businesses that don't make this a success, in general, have a business leader who has been too rigid in terms of how it's going to roll out. So you need to be very flexible because how you're going to reduce work time in your business might end up being something you weren't expecting. Mm-hmm. And so this is where the 100-80-100 rule is so good.
And certainly where we evolved ours, didn't we, in our company. Yeah. So when we did it in the beginning, we did have a 4-day week. That was what we did. But if you give people something they don't want, they don't value, it doesn't work. Now, that can be another gym membership. It could be, I'll give you some life insurance or whatever it is. We often do when we do human resource benefits, right? But what we're giving you now is time. So what we've got to do is give you the time off that's important to you. And so that's where we evolved to, wasn't it? We moved to a process where you could take a day or couple of half days, or working parents could come in late, go home early 5 days a week, because giving them a day off didn't actually work. They got to deal with the childcare. So it evolved. That's what works for us.
Yeah.
But we're very clear. Charlotte's very clear on when you're talking as well on this. You've got to do what works for your business and your people.
Well, so I have 3 criteria on this. It has to be good for the company. It has to be good for the company's customers or key stakeholders, and it has to be good for the people. And so, so it's about working out how you make all those 3 things work. But I mean, some practical examples of what Andrew's talking about. There is a gentleman out there who comes into work at 10 o'clock in the morning every day, so he comes in 5 days, having walked his daughter to school. 5 days a week. Walks his daughter to school. Now, what father out there doesn't want that? So if he had a 4-day week and had, I don't know, Fridays off, then he would be able to do that one day. But also, as we head into recessionary times and there's all of this cost of living pressure, he doesn't have before school childcare costs. And if the child's mother or other parent has the ability to pick that child up from school, then they don't have after school costs into the family. So it's materially significant for a family financially if they can do that. But then what are we doing about how we keep that family as a cohesive whole? The children are being raised by their parents, not by others. And so therefore we are actually creating a better society. So, and to your point about the Deloitte's information around burnout. So in the UK, ONS data says that we lose 17.9, so let's face it, nearly 18 million worker days to workplace stress and burnout. Now, that's a significant drain on the economy. So not just on the CFO's purse for his business, but actually on our economy. And that's a day that was lost. Now, I'm going to go out, use your phrase, go out on a limb here, but I take a day off because I'm burnt out. How productive was I the day before? And the day before that, and the day before that? And when I return to work, am I 100% productive as soon as I come back? Probably not. So actually, it's economically sensible to focus in on well-being in the workplace and well-being in our society, because we actually get better businesses. And if we know that 1 in 4 of our workforce are suffering from mental health or workplace stress, then 25% of your workforce are not productive now.
Yeah, I couldn't.
So the economics are quite clear. You don't have to be a fully trained PhD economist to work out how that's going to work.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more, and not to mention attrition, right? So McKinsey Health Institute did some research which showed that if you're suffering from burnout, you're 6 times more likely to want to leave your job. But I think the productivity piece is really interesting. You mentioned Professor Jan Emanuel Deneve earlier. Yeah. We actually had him as a guest on a previous podcast, but he has a paper in management science where he actually did a study with BT to truly understand is a happier employee more productive, but actually quantify it. So the science says that a 1 standard deviation increase in happiness leads to a 12% increase in productivity. So, it's certainly the business case is there. And listening to you, the evidence is really compelling.
To be brutally honest, I didn't need a 5-year project to work out that healthier people are more productive, happier people are more productive.
But the science is good.
The science is helpful.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the key parts of what we do, is that the research we do is there because I can stand there and shout till I'm blue in the face that this is a good idea. The reason we got all the publicity, the reason I think that 4-day week global has got the traction is actually we worked alongside universities to produce objective research that proves what we already know. But you know what? It's quite a lonely position for a chief exec to say, you know what, I'm going to do this. Yeah. So what we're really about doing is making it safe for people to experiment, because you can point to the research, you can point to all that objective data and say, look, it works. And that means that you can You can deal with your board. I mean, I always say I cracked the problem with my board because I just announced I was doing it on national television first. And they weren't game enough to say we're not going to go along with this. But clearly that doesn't work for a lot of companies. You've got to bring stakeholders on the journey.
Yeah. And that's why, you're just running a pilot, right? So that's a less scary thing for a board to agree to.
Yeah. Can I ask how many pilots you've run? Because you've run, is it countless?
Well, yes. So we've run pilots in Australia, New Zealand. So we've got one running in South Africa at the moment, Portugal. We've done Ireland, UK, the US, Canada. We've got Brazil starting soon, and a European pilot as well. So we're running in pretty much every market. We've got Asian pilots that are going to start this year as well. So we run them all around. But one of the things that when I was doing a bit of a ring around of companies during the pandemic to sort of see how they were going, one of the pieces of feedback was it's a bit of a lonely space. I can ring you, Charlotte, I can ring Andrew, and I can Google and see what other companies are doing, and then I can try and get hold of another CEO that's doing it. But so one of the things that we've done is we've created a community. So we run, we have a community that CEOs and other business leaders can join, and they can share ideas. And when they become part of that and they go, well, I've tried this with my business and it worked this way and I tried it with this. And so it gives them the ability to learn from each other, not just listen to what we tell them. Yeah. And that gives them a greater sense of not being alone.
I think one of the great things about the whole community, though, is it's quite a generous community. I mean, we've worked with thousands of businesses who've reached out. We had a policy right from the get-go that we share everything about our original pilot and trial, down to how we structured contracts and how we got the advice to try and get round the problems of rather prescriptive employment legislation, which is one of the biggest problems you have when you're trying to implement a 4-day reduced hours week. But the reality is, as a community, people are very generous now with their time. We're on the right side of history here. And I think that's part of the strength of the movement, that you see what it does, not just to your business, but to people. Yeah. And you want to share that. Yeah. And so there's a lot of generosity in the 4-day week movement globally, which is a really nice thing to see.
Well, and in the wellbeing movement globally as well. I mean, the reality is sensible employers understand that this is just the only way that you're going to be able to move forward, as well as including flexible and possibly also remote in your workplace moving forward. Some research came out of Otago University in New Zealand that said that working from home didn't suit 29% of people. And that was the headline, doesn't suit 29%, which means that it suits 71% of people. And that was obviously research that came out post-pandemic. But my question to myself when I saw that was, so does that mean that prior to the pandemic, and we did flexible and remote, that we actually weren't providing our people with the type of workplace that best suits them? Well, it's just that the pandemic has highlighted that for us. And one of the things that I often say when I'm talking is people lost their lives and their livelihoods with the pandemic. And how are we going to honour that sacrifice if we don't have true, proper social change?
Agreed.
What do we learn if we don't take the lesson and move forward with that? And so I think it's just really important that we honour them.
It's certainly the next part on our journey is when we're looking at the research, we're going to start to move away from productivity in companies, because we actually take a view that's broadly been proven now, that we can see that productivity isn't adversely impacted. But there is some good basic data, and we're starting to build on that around what's the social impact of actually people having more time? What does that mean about volunteering? What does it mean about family cohesion? What does it mean for education? What does it mean for the environment? I mean, there's a piece of research that says that if the UK went to a 4-day week, it would be the equivalent of taking the entire UK private car fleet off the road. Now think about what that has the potential to do for the environment.
Yeah.
What happens to health if, in fact, the 1 in 4, 1 in 5 with mental health, they're the people who are going into the NHS? What does that do to the NHS? What does that do to waiting lists? What does that do to the pressure on our hospitals if actually we have a healthier, happier workforce?
Well, one of the interesting things that came out of on the health statistic, one of the things that came out of the research was that people got 7 hours more sleep a week.
Wow.
Now, you might be sleeping your entire day off, but I think not. But we know the health statistics around sleep are significant and material on our ongoing health and how we cope with cancers and heart attacks and all that sort of thing. So if there was less insomnia, less of these other things that become pressures on people. And so the person that you're bringing to work is somebody who's better
Who's
rested.
probably also spending a bit more time working out and cooking, which basically means not having high salt takeaway food because they're time poor.
I mean, the hypothesis, I guess, here is you're sleeping better, to your point, because you're not lying awake thinking, oh, I have to do this, I have to be up at 6 a.m., etc. And I read a really interesting academic paper, but it really struck me because they found that work is one of the hardest desires to resist. Now, what really struck me was the other temptations are things that we know to be addictive, right? Smoking, alcohol, food, but yet work was up there. Mm-hmm. We all know workaholics. Mm. And you've kind of touched on workaholics a little bit earlier on. How has moving to a 4-day week, has that helped people who might fall into that slightly addicted to work space to switch off?
Yeah, so I often sort of say that people are addicted to activity more than necessarily work. And so one of the things that I encourage businesses to do to feed into this is to actually get people to report in on what they're doing with their extra time. And make sure that because these people just want to be acknowledged. So acknowledge what they're doing. And the number one thing that people do from our research, the number one thing that people do with the extra time is take up a new hobby. Lovely. They spend it on hobbies. So they're spending it on themselves or on something that is useful. So, and that was the Microsoft Japan trial is quite interesting because it was widely reported. No more than 5 people in a meeting, no meetings more than 30 minutes, and please use Microsoft Teams. And they got this big uptick in productivity. But what wasn't widely reported was they actually asked their people to tell them, and they actually applied some money to it as well, what are you going to do for your community? What are you going to do for your family? And what are you going to do for yourself? And so it's actually about getting people to think outside of themselves. And, and I get people saying to me all the time, oh, but I love being at work. Good. But, why don't you love being in society as well? Mm.
Yeah.
And I think one of the challenges that we've seen post-COVID or during COVID, we have gone to working from home. That's good for a whole part of people. But you're not actually working from home. You're sleeping in the office. And so the problem is we've actually seen that the working day often has expanded because it's that temptation. Mm-hmm. We want the activity that I've got to do that last lot of emails late at night. So one of the great things about the reduced hours 4-day week movement is it starts to put some quite firm barriers around the amount of time that you spend working.
And permissions as well.
Permission not to work is an important part of the process, because if you don't do that, the temptation is always to let's do a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And that's why it comes back to the need to have the people at the very top walk the talk, because otherwise you go, well, I hear all of that, but if I want to get to that job, that role, I really have to just put all the time in.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point because, one of the things, I think, by the way, an awful lot of businesses are really working hard to create a positive culture. But, we have seen where, a business maybe hires, a head of well-being and offers these wonderful well-being benefits, but there's a disconnect with actually the company culture and social norms. So, what you don't want is people to think, oh, well, I won't really work 4 days, otherwise I'll get looked over for promotion. So to your point, it really has to cascade from the top, and everybody needs to walk the talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's absolutely critical, because otherwise it will fail.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no doubt it will fail if you don't have that very firm direction from the top. You're empowering people, but you're also holding the leadership team accountable that their teams have got to be working 4 days a week. That's a total change.
Yeah.
But that's really what you've got to do. You're saying, look, if it doesn't work in a pilot program, I'll carry as the CEO the responsibility for the fact that it didn't produce the outcome that I thought it was. But you've got to make sure that you're playing your part, that your team is actually doing it and doing it properly. And if that happens, actually the evidence suggests that you get the good results and you get the benefits not just on the human side, but on the output, productivity, profitability side.
And look, and a lot of business leaders find that when they cascade down the permissions, but the genuine story seems to rest at home when they pull together how they're going to communicate it to their key stakeholders or clients. When you have to explain it to someone who's not in your organisation but is connected to your organisation, where you explain why you're doing it, that's when it tends to really cascade down from the C-suite who are having to deal with that messaging and the actual people who are delivering it to the client, and helping the client be okay with the fact that your business isn't necessarily going to be open, or that the service delivery might look different. And so that tends to be a kind of a drop the mic moment when people when the penny drops for people when they have to explain it to the outside world.
No, it makes a lot of sense. What I'm absolutely loving about this conversation is you mentioned, the impact of the pandemic earlier, and I suppose honouring, the learnings we've taken from that. I feel that one of the things the pandemic taught us is there's a new type of diversity. So, I'm a big champion of diversity, equity and inclusion. And we talk about gender diversity, diversity of ethnicity, experience, sexual orientation. But actually, there's diversity of home circumstance. Yeah. So some people live by themselves and it can be lonely. Some people have small children. Some people are caring for elderly relatives. Some people might flat share. And actually, that isn't particularly conducive to working from home. And one of the things I've loved about this conversation is it's not about the 4-day week. It's about flexibility. It's about understanding people's needs and flexing that work culture to suit the needs of many. Would that be fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we're not, even in our company, 15% of the people at any point in time will work 5 days a week because they want to. And people work 5 days a week often because socially, that's something that they want to do. All we're saying is we're holding everybody accountable by the same benchmarks. This is the productivity we want. Now, if you want to work 5 days a week, knock yourself out.
But just to clarify that, Andrew, so they're working 5 days a week, but they're working fewer hours on those 5 days?
No,
okay.
You would literally get some people who say, I want to work a conventional 40-hour week.
I know. I have no idea why I can't understand it. But you can't force people.
I think there was a wonderful thing that came out of one of the companies, and they were doing some research. I think it was Bangladesh, and they were talking about working less, working from home, and their workforce was predominantly young women. And they said, "No, thank you. I want to come to the office, come to the business." They said, "Why?" He said, "My mother-in-law's at home." There's a cultural issue.
So your point is well made. That the modern workplace reflects the diversity of circumstance at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this is so interesting. I am going to go to what I like to call the rapid fire round. I call this my quiz show house round. So this is rapid fire. First of all, the question that many people will have: do both of you work a 4-day week?
Well, I work a 4-day week in all of my businesses.
So how many businesses do you have, Andrew?
About 5 or 6. We're basically now retired. We've got people who run the businesses, but the thing we're not retired on and this. And so, for example, last night I did a talk for a firm in Sydney, followed by a speech for the ACT, and now I'm here. So, I've been working all through the night, but then changing the world is...
But are you going to get your 7 or 8 hours sleep tonight, Andrew?
Yes, absolutely. And look, and I mean, my life is just actually having a series of fascinating conversations with interesting people such as yourself. And we don't have a standard go to the office, work a role type thing. So, but we wouldn't work more than 20 hours a week.
No, I agree.
Okay, so you don't tend to work more than 20 hours
if we're defining that this is so what we're doing here, that if we're defining that even this is work, we wouldn't. So I mean, tomorrow we've got other things we're going to do. Head off to London, British Museum.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, a few things like that. Yeah,
Wonderful.
You're going to Bisley on Friday.
Yeah.
So it's
yeah. Okay, it was rapid fire. So to the next question. Now, I like to ask people how you're doing. And, one of the things actually that really, Aristotle would have said that the goal of life is what he called eudaimonia, right? Which is purpose-driven happiness, purpose-driven well-being. And listening to both of you, my goodness, what you do for a living is so purpose-driven. But how the academics like to measure well-being, instead of saying, how are you? They'll say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your life satisfaction nowadays? Can I go to you first, Charlotte?
Oh, I would put myself at probably a 9 or a 10. I mean, I'm very blessed. We have an environment where we are not financially challenged. So we are able to take on this job, I call it a job, this passion project, to help change the world. And so we have a fairly unique opportunity to be able to do that. I am probably more of a 9 than a 10 just because and it's not something that I have as a secret. I've got metastatic breast cancer. So there's a part of me that knows that I've got a more limited time on this earth, and that sits in my head from time to time. But I also have a true mission. So I know that when I get to the end of what will be my now shortened life, I will have had a chance to truly achieve something. And that makes the journey that I'm on with my health all the more accepting because I can do that.
Charlotte, I didn't know that, and thank you so much for sharing. And I'm so sorry to hear that you're going through that, but I'm bowled over by your positivity and how you're dealing with what you're going through. You're an absolute inspiration, Charlotte. So thank you so much. Do you mind if I ask a follow-up question, which is, how do you? What are your tips for your own well-being? How do you look after yourself? And I'm going to ask the same question to Andrew.
I have to listen to him every now and then, and he says to me, "You're doing too much." So you have to let people in, and you have to. The reason why I share what I'm going through is because it makes me accountable to others, and so if I start to take on too much. This man here is the first one to point it out, my children, my mother, people around me. So then it means that also that when I am tired or when I am feeling like I've stretched myself, that I can just say to people, look, I'm sorry, I have to take a step back for a period of time. And so that is the thing. But yes, you're I am... I'm one of these people that likes to go hell for leather with anything. So having an accountability partner, I think is good. Oh yes, to be fair, I'm your accountability partner.
So what are your tips then, Andrew? How do you switch off? How do you look after your well-being?
Well, this is one of the great things about this. This is about just literally making time for other things, working out what's more important. Now I'm prioritizing, my family, my children, my health, because, I've had a life where I've had people have nervous breakdowns in front of me because of the pressure of the work that they're in. And I know a couple of times I've come very close to the line. And I don't want that for me. I don't want it for my kids. So if I've got to walk the talk here, right? We have to walk the talk, which is you've got to work out what's more important. So, I'd put myself down as a 9 or 10 on the scale, because you just don't get many chances to change the world for the better. We're not an Elon Musk or a Jack Ma with a 996 or 100 hours. You can keep that. What we want is to make life better for everyone. Everybody in the world, they want to, bring up their kids. They want a decent standard of living. They want basic levels of security. They want a good life. What this is about is actually sharing the benefits of the more productive society and making life better. And I personally can't think of a better epitaph.
I mean, what an incredible place to finish this interview, to be honest. Making life better.
Better for everyone.
Hashtag better for everyone. I particularly like that came from your Irish pilot, Charlotte. It has been wonderful speaking to both of you. You are change makers, you are innovators, and you are an utter inspiration. So thank you so much.